Okay, I want to put the disclaimer out there that this is not a scripted video, and I am not known for my highly skilled extemporaneous content creation. I can talk extemporaneously, like, outside of the camera, but like these types of moments, they tend not to go well. But I thought it'd be good to kind of offer a raw reaction and just my thoughts on Johnathan Majors being found guilty in this particular case, and hopefully find a way to synthesize, I think, a lot of ideas and feelings that at least I haven't seen yet on social media or YouTube or Twitter or wherever else, that hopefully can give a voice to certain headspaces and emotions that I don't think are often not represented when these types of issues and stories happen in real life. But again, this is not scripted. This will be heavily edited, but not scripted. Shout out to Babilla, who's going to make sure that anything that I say that will get me in trouble will not see the light of day. So first, let's start out with like some non-negotiable important takeaways. The core of how this issue plays out in social media should first be focused on the nature of abuse and how victims of abuse often find themselves invisibilized, unsupported, put in dire situations, and really not getting justice through legal systems and definitely in the public eye. I made a video a couple of months ago at this point about why we believe victims. None of the things I said in that video are any less relevant right now. From my perspective, the biggest problem that potentially is playing out in the way we talk about this situation is how many people, mostly men, will use it to diminish the reality of how victims are usually treated in the public eye and by our police and in their communities when they are in a situation where they are suffering under the hands of an intimate partner. Shout out to the Waving the Red Flag podcast, which is probably going to drop maybe a day before this actually comes out. And we talked before the verdict came, by the way. We talked about the whole apologize to Johnathan Majors crowd, which is a really interesting thing. Like, the funny thing is, I had a script because, I'll be honest, I didn't think he was going to get convicted. I had a script that was going to be something like, I'm still not apologizing to Johnathan Majors. And the thesis of that script was going to be about the fact that if the case was that he was found innocent, the people that want me to apologize to Johnathan Majors don't really want me to apologize to Johnathan Majors. I don't know Johnathan Majors. He's probably not going to watch this video. What they really want me to do is to apologize to them. They want to feel vindicated and validated about their particular worldview for not believing women. That's what it comes down to. Shout out to Eddie, who that's his exact phrasing they'll probably get from that podcast. But you said something I thought was even more powerful. They want us to apologize for believing a woman.
That's what I think it is, yeah.
What they want men like me to do is to apologize for daring to believe a woman against a man. And like, they probably don't even realize that because they're so caught up in this culture, gender war nonsense, that they don't think about the ramifications of what they're saying. I struggle to believe that these guys online that have this ideology and personality don't have women in their lives who they care about, who they've maybe seen in these types of situations. I don't get it. I get it. Like, I know it's a thing. I've seen it in real life. I've worked with it, but it still blows me whenever that becomes such a demonstrative and potent part of a person's whole personality. Like, that's some of these dudes' whole personality online is fuck women, don't believe women, women deserve less, etc. Good luck with that, gentlemen. Good luck with that. I can't help but reflect back to Meg Thee Stallion just maybe a year ago, and Keke Palmer that's happening now, and I talked about it before, R. Kelly, Bill Cosby, so many instances where the goal of this community was to not believe women, to expose these women to however much harm they deserved for whatever reason, and consequences be damned if it meant that they could get a W online and dunk on some black feminists on Twitter. That's, for some of these dudes, that is what it is to them. On a slight tangent, one of the reasons why this conversation gets so toxic on Twitter is the way in which Twitter emphasizes and promotes bias and like algorithmically optimized conflict among its audience. Specifically, there are entire misinformation campaigns and websites that mostly only exist on Twitter because the way people consume their information and news on Twitter is built to make misinformation really, really viable and lucrative. There are people who still still don't actually know the facts about this case or about Meg Thee Stallion's case from over a year ago, because the only news they get off of Twitter and their social media and algorithmic feeds is explicitly designed to feed them the exact news that they want to hear, to promote the worldview and ideology that they most closely align to. And knowing the ways that this works is one of the reasons why I'm always happy to be sponsored by Ground News. Now, if you look up stories on Johnathan Majors in Ground News, it seems that he's being covered pretty widely and I assume fairly across the political spectrum, which sadly doesn't surprise me. This is the type of news that we will get a lot of coverage, but it still helps to track the Johnathan Majors story via Ground News because so many of the features from Ground News allow it to provide perspective on what biases, if any, are present and how factual the story is. While this isn't the biggest, most important story going on in America right now, that feature is still huge, allowing us to cut through the misinformation that is plaguing the way we get the news these days. This is one of the reasons why I'm always excited to talk about today's sponsor, Ground News. Going back to the Johnathan Majors story and many of these stories that have so much energy on social media, if you sit back and analyze what happens a lot of times, what you'll find is that misinformation spreads quickly and without barriers, and people often don't even know that they're getting bad information because they trust Google or because they trust their feed on TikTok or Twitter or wherever. They don't know that when you search for a piece of information on Google, Google uses your previous search history not necessarily to find you the best answer for what you need, but the answer for what you need that will keep you the most engaged. So for me, as a clearly very left-leaning person, if I wanted to know what news was being fed to people more conservative than I am, I still probably wouldn't get an accurate picture. But that isn't the case with Ground News. Not only do they provide all the news aggregated from countless sites across the internet, they provide objective ratings on how these news sources tend to lean in their reporting, and they give you a rating on how much circulation a story has had in a given political sphere. To go even further, Ground News has a feature called Blind Spot, where it purposely finds stories that have been very polarized, meaning they're stories that, depending on your political leanings, you just have not seen. For example, this headline caught my eye. Commentary: once a vaunted dream, now liberty and justice for all, is a tattered cliche. And I'm thinking to myself, who on the right is reading that? Because that sounds like something I should be reading. Now, I'm pretty sure that I'm probably not going to agree with what I'm going to find in these articles, but it'll still be interesting to learn about how people from the right wing interpret that phrase and its tattered clichéness. The end result of features like this is being able to cut through misinformation and bias that currently plagues our media and is actively making people less informed. Subscribe to Ground News using my link, Ground News /signified B-sides, to take advantage of their holiday sale. It's their best deal of the year. You'll get 40% off unlimited access to their app, website, and newsletters for just $5 a month. So sign up today and help support an independent platform working to make the media landscape more transparent. But I do want to unpack the fact that I didn't think he was going to be convicted. And that's because after I saw the video that I saw and read most of what I read, I just didn't imagine that they would find enough proof for a conviction. And if I'm honest, I'm kind of bothered by that. And I want to hold space for other men who don't want to protect and promote the abuse of women, but also don't like how the criminal justice system tends to play out when it pertains to black men, which is why I started with that first part first, because it's so hard to have that conversation and not have it hijacked by dudes whose whole argument around these issues comes down to, why do white men get to abuse women but black men don't get to abuse women? And like, abuse, right, is the first problem up here. And then the second problem is the disproportionate way that the criminal justice system affects black men. And I can't say that I don't see how that would be relevant here. We do have so many cases where we see white men involved in this type of activity, and the consequences never seem to have the same amount of notoriety. Right around when Johnathan Majors got arrested, Brad Pitt had just been outed by Angelina Jolie as an abuser, about how he abused not just her, but his children. And he is literally like taking photos on the stage of the Grammy Awards or whatever. This isn't, and I want to be very, very clear, and I hope I'm being careful as I can here, this isn't to insinuate that it should be okay for Johnathan Majors to get away with what he did, because I'll get to this in a second. I do think Johnathan Majors is an abuser, but it's more so to point out how the criminal justice system, as I said in my Fuck the Police video, does not really protect people from anything, does not actually provide justice in these circumstances. And then the court of public opinion will always put more effort into scrutinizing, vilifying, and demonizing the behavior of black men in comparison to anyone else. I just really, really wish I didn't have to feel like I needed to be so careful around this conversation. And I want to acknowledge the reason why is because these dudes on Twitter, you know who they are, only want to hear the part where they get to excuse the behavior of black men, regardless of the situation. It's about keeping in perspective how these different racist systems in play make what happened to Johnathan Majors much more likely than what happened to Brad Pitt or insert whatever other Hollywood guy here that isn't black. I also want to hold space for those dudes that were Johnathan Majors fans. Now, I want to be clear, if you look enough into this case, Johnathan Majors is not worthy of your fandom. He's just not. If you read up on what was going on, if you just read the tea leaves on the various things that were expunged and sealed about this man's past, as well as the things that did still come out in the actual court case, at a minimum, Johnathan Major is not a good guy. And most likely, I say he is a man that is definitely capable of being abusive and has been abusive in the past to women in his life, whether that be physical or emotional. And I'm going to be honest, probably both. So Johnathan Majors is not worthy of your devotion and dedication in this situation. It is what it is. However, I do empathize with some of those black men who were really, really rooting for Johnathan Majors, because I was one of them. I did a video about Johnathan Majors defending him before all this happened, because for one, I saw an extremely talented and gifted performer that I just was looking forward to enjoying watching his career continue. But furthermore, for a brief moment, Johnathan Majors was doing something with black masculinity in the public eye that I didn't think was possible. He was definitely taking it in directions that black men often weren't allowed to take it. That was one of the magical things about him as a performer, is that he had the physicality, you know, because of the way he was built, but also the way his face looked, let's keep it real, to convey so much grand emotion that to me was very enthralling and captivating to watch in almost all of his roles. And then outside of his roles, he was very challenging and transgressive while also still being able to perform traditional masculinity. It's no wonder that some of the same dudes that are riding for him now were attacking him a couple of months ago for wearing pink. I'm done with those dudes for this section of the video. I'm moving on. But there are people who are disappointed by this verdict, not because a black man didn't get away with abusing a woman, not because they're angry about white men getting to abuse their women in ways that black men don't, and whatever the nonsense here, but because even when it seems deserved, it's never fun seeing black male figures fall in the public eye. Pretty much, period. It's not a good time. And it happens all the time. As a man of 41, I have seen so many of the heroes and icons that I've come to appreciate over the course of my lifetime be exposed to be abusers, racists, grifters, scammers. Kanye, Cosby, Kelly. Yeah, names all start with K. And it gets tiring going through that. And more specifically, I think the thing that frustrates me the most, that made me want to respond raw, is that what happens is the monstrosity of a given guy that did a bad thing in the public. Like, there's the groups that defend them no matter what. And then there's the people that are rejoicing in the fall. And it feels like there's really only two sides of that conversation almost every time. And I just don't feel heard, right? I don't feel heard as a man that completely gets and agrees with why Johnathan Majors losing his career and being found guilty makes perfect sense. But I also feel like there should be space for people who don't like seeing this to be heard in the conversation. And I don't want to be grouped with these niggas over here, because we're not saying the same thing. And the way these conversations happen about black men just don't include what I believe is the majority of black male voices. It's these loud Negroes on Twitter who get all the attention because of how the algorithms work. And I don't want to get into that in this video. Then there's a population of people making valid critiques, and then just people making jokes. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy me some jokes. And the critiques I already agree with, but it don't feel good to be in the middle saying, I was rooting for this nigga. Damn, I really wanted this nigga to succeed.
You were the chosen one.
And I don't think I'm alone in that. And I don't like feeling like that's a dangerous thing to say. Maybe it's not the thing to say in the moment. Maybe this is a video that comes out a week from now, but it's still an important aspect of the conversation. And the last thing that I don't think is an important aspect of the conversation is the fact that this is a white woman that he was with. I'm not getting into all that. I made a whole video about interracial relationships a couple of weeks ago. Anything I have to say about that aspect of the story can be found in that video. I will admit it was quite funny from my perspective, watching this man run down the street like a character from Resident Evil being chased by zombies. But that was such a profoundly ugly moment at the same time, because you realize this man's low-key running for his life. Yeah. I don't know what else to say here, y'all. I hope that this is received in the way that it's intended. And if it isn't, I could always vault it and put it on Nebula. I'm Feet the Signifier, and this has been Light Work.